everybody, this is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to ChangeWorks Certified ChangeWorks System Coach Training. This is lesson 2 on the Introduction to Productive Tension. Joining me as always is Dave Miller. Say hi, Dave.
Hello, everyone.
And Dave is going to be facilitating today's call. So if you've got any questions as we work our way through that, those that are on the live call, feel free to go ahead and type Dave whatever questions or comments you'd like, and he'll either chime them in as we work our way through the program, or he'll open up the line for you to participate openly. So with that, today is lesson 2, Intro to Productive Tension. This is the discovery session. And so during the discovery session, our focus is just laying out the core principles, the concepts, the techniques that are involved. Following today's discovery session, you'll all be invited to participate in the in the discussion session. The discussion session is an opportunity for you to listen to members of the ChangeWorks faculty and senior certified ChangeWorks professionals in how they go about using what we're covering today in the work they're actually doing with their coaching clients. So with that, we need to talk a little bit about what is the ChangeWorks system. Again, you're going to be designated as certified ChangeWorks system coaches. So it might be good to understand what is the ChangeWorks system. And so today I'd like to just give you a very quick high-level overview of what that system involves. And we'll talk a little bit about how it actually plays out in your coaching sessions with someone. And we'll also then get into the levels of productive tension. So what exactly is the ChangeWorks system? Well, the ChangeWorks system is actually just a structure that we find very practical, very useful, very portable in having meaningful dialogue with our clients. And if you were to go through the whole ChangeWorks system, there would be 6 steps that you would follow. But as you work your way through this material, you'll quickly realize that in daily use of this, you may or may not do all steps. You may skip certain steps. You may focus entirely on one step. But this is the overall ChangeWorks system. Step 1 of the ChangeWorks system is that you're going to walk the path of self-discovery. Now, walking the path of self-discovery is a structured conversation that we have with our clients. You may find it very similar to other questioning techniques that you've learned in other programs and trainings that you've experienced, but this is the one that we use very diligently in our work as ChangeWorks professionals. So you'll be going through the path of self-discovery and how to lead someone along the path of self-discovery in a future session, but we begin by having some sort of an engaging dialogue with the client. Now, that dialogue is going to give rise to a list of very specific activities that this particular person would like to perform. And these activities could include their goals, whatever projects they're working on, whatever it is the client happens to be sharing. And again, I'll go through this in more detail as I click through the following slides. After you define the activities, then you have the opportunity to administer an assessment. Now, this assessment could be administered in a very casual, informal, purely conversational way. We're simply going to ask the client a couple of questions about each activity, and based on their answers to those questions, we're going to be able to have perhaps a deeper conversation with them about that, or it's going to give rise to other things that we will choose to explore. At the other end of things, though, the assessment can actually be a paper and pencil tool. So the client can fill this out if you happen to be sitting with them. You can fill it out on their behalf, but it's just a document we'll be acquainting you with that allows you to do this in a very interactive, in the moment sort of way. We also have a very formal online tool that allows you to create change grids. And then you can do a very formal sort of a thing, very much in depth, lots of activities. And so you get to choose. Do you want this to just be a conversational interaction? Do you want this to be a little bit of a paper and pencil sort of an experience for a client? Or do you want to do it as a full-blown, fully deployed, internet-based assessment tool? So that's completely up to you. I will tell you that far more often than not, our ChangeWorks professionals are not creating change grids online. They really are using it more as just a tool of conversation, or perhaps as that interactive paper and pencil tool I just mentioned to you. Now, as you administer the assessment, if you're using the ChangeWorks system, the responses to these activities are going to be plotted on a wonderful diagram that you're going to see in just a few minutes. You are then going to help the client to understand what the results of their change grid mean, or what that diagram is actually reflecting. And then based on that reflection, you're going to develop some specific action plans that will support that client in doing whatever it is that needs to be done in order for them to perform that activity or reach that goal more effectively. So that's what the big ChangeWorks system looks like overall. Starts off with a conversation, ends up with action plans, and in between there's some opportunities to help the client see what's really going on in a very different and very powerful sort of way. Now, to just walk you through it a little bit, so you know a little bit more about the path of self-discovery. Oh, by the way, as certified ChangeWorks system coaches, all of you are also given the ability to give your clients their own ChangeWorks system, their own live change grid online that they can use for journaling, they can use as a preparation for your coaching sessions or as a follow-up to those coaching sessions. And so as part of the training that they get to go through, there's a 6-hour training course. It's all complimentary. Well, actually, you guys are welcome to charge your client whatever you would like for that. But our intention behind it is that you have the ability to gift this personal ChangeWorks system. You might also see it labeled as the Oracle of the Self. The program that goes along with it is called Mastering Personal Change. This is all something that's very much geared towards the consumer. As a licensed ChangeWorks system coach, you can give people that whenever you want. You can give it to your clients. If you're doing maybe a speaking engagement as a way of building your practice, perhaps you can give everyone in the audience that. You can give it freely to anyone you want, whenever you want. You're also able to charge them for it and keep all the revenue from that if you would like. So we'll talk more about that as your training continues. But point is, walking the path of self-discovery. It's great that you can do this with your clients, but we're also going to encourage you to equip your clients to do this for themselves. So a little bit of self-coaching. And basically what they're going to be doing as they walk this path is looking at their current situation, defining their desired situation, identifying those things that may be in their way, coming up with some sort of solution or strategy to get those obstacles out of the way and help them reach that desired situation. And then ultimately, we want them to make some sort of emotional heart level connection to whatever that solution happens to be. Obviously, if people feel connected, they've bought in to whatever the solution is, they're certainly more likely to follow through and do what needs to be done. So this path of self-discovery is a nice structure for a conversation that will help your client to get to the outcomes they really are looking for. We believe more effectively than many of the other techniques that we've stumbled across. Now, at the end of that or as you walk along that path, you're going to start hearing what could be an activity that is worth plotting. So I wanted to give you an idea about what exactly do we mean by activities. Well, activity is just kind of a sort of a collective term for a lot of very common things that clients tend to want to talk about. So they might want to talk about things that are on their plate, tasks they have to take care of, things that need to get done. Maybe they're talking bigger picture goals. What is it that they like to accomplish by whenever and how they know they got there? But what about the goals? Maybe they're talking to you about different relationships and having a more productive relationship with with someone or getting along more effectively or influencing someone more powerfully, but it's about relationships that they have. Maybe they're in a situation and they just like to look at that situation, not so much in terms of the specific tasks that are involved or the goals they might have around that situation, just about dealing with a situation. And it may also be that they're at a place in their life where they're at a crossroads and they have multiple options available to them about directions they could go, and they really want to better understand what they will encounter as they pursue a particular option so that they can choose wisely and prepare themselves accordingly with eyes wide open. Now, as we start to work with you more and more about extracting those activities from that dialogue, we're also going to be giving you some pointers about how to craft an activity so it will be the most powerful activity that you can. And a couple of things we're going to give you as pointers is to make sure that they are verbs. These are activities. These are things that are being done or need to be done. So there's a verb involved. And very often, the power of the activity is determined by the verb. So the better the verb is, the more accurate the verb is, the more powerful the whole process of tension management will end up being. So we'll be getting into a lot of detailed discussions about extracting activities, choosing activities to explore in greater detail, defining those activities in the best possible way, and then pursuing the next steps of the process. After you've defined the activities, you will be administering this assessment. Now again, this whole assessment, and I did that in air quotes for those of you who can't see through the internet, I did that in air quotes because this assessment could be purely conversational. But one of the things I want to ask someone as we look at an activity is, well, how do you rate your ability to perform that activity? And I could be happy in a conversational setting if they just say, well, they think their ability is really strong, or it's pretty good, or they could improve, or whatever. I'm all right with that. If they're filling out the profile in its most formal term, we're going to ask them to give a numerical rating for how they would rate their ability. Ability is what's happening on the left side of your brain. It's about logical sorts of things, so it's very objective, and ability is made up of some pretty concrete variables. So what's your level of knowledge? What's your level of skill? What's your level of experience? What's your level of resource availability? So as I ask someone to tell me how they'd rate their level of ability, that's what I'm asking them to do. Kind of blend together what you know, what you can do, what your experience has been in doing that, and what resources you have, and tell me on a scale of low to high or 0 to 12, how do you rate your ability to perform that activity effectively? Now, without going any further, or talking about even the existence of a change grid, I will tell you that just asking a client that question has led to tremendous amounts of additional exploration with them, because very often clients have an activity in mind, or they have a goal in mind, and now they're looking at the activities necessary to reach that goal. And there's just this assumption that they have that they're fully prepared to do it. But as we start to ask them to think about and share with us specifics about the level of knowledge and skill and experience and resource availability they have, a whole new level of awareness opens up that leads to a lot more dialogue and gives us indications about their readiness to actually embark upon whatever the journey is for accomplishing that task. So that's ability. Dave, any comments, thoughts, questions from anyone about what we mean by the path, or what we mean by the overall system, or about ability so far?
Not so far.
Okay, good. All right, so that's ability. And again, you might do it very conversationally more often than not, but you may do it very formally as well, as you'll get to. Now, ability ranges from a low of 0 to a high of 12 as we start to look at the change grid. And as we get to it, the change grid can be simply nothing more than a reference diagram that you are looking at and sharing with your client. It can also be an instrument for in-depth exploration and understanding. But we're asking someone to rate their ability. We're saying, like, when it comes to this particular activity, would you consider yourself to be a 0 which would be clueless, or a 12, which would be a documentable expert on this. So I'm saying, how much knowledge, how much experience, how much skill, how many resources, what do you have? And you might say, I've got nothing, nothing at all. So I'm down here at the low end of the scale. You might say, well, I've got some, I've got, it's workable. Or you might say, well, I'm really pretty skilled at that one. I know my stuff. Well, they might immediately give themselves a 12, where the truth is more of a 10 or 11. But conversationally, we get it. They feel very, very confident in their ability to take care of the task. Now, another assessment we're going to ask them to do is the assessment of challenge. Just because someone has the ability to do something does not mean it's going to be easy. Ask any Olympic athlete and they will tell you that. Just because they have a proven track record, undeniable skill levels, does not mean that medaling in that event and standing on that platform is going to be a given. So any kind of an activity always represents a certain level of challenge. Now, when we ask someone to tell us about what's going on with their challenge, and again, conversationally, not the tool yet, but conversationally, we're just asking them to tell us a little bit about what's going on the right brain side of things, with more of their creative functions. This is a little bit more subjective as they think about the particular activity or the particular situation. Challenge is built from a lot of abstract variables, like the emotions that they're feeling, or the intuitions, what's going on at their gut level, or abstract sorts of experiences, like confidence and things like that. So, abstract experiences are something we'll talk about in greater detail, but they're very important for us to understand as coaches. When someone describes himself as being confident, for example, the question we want to ask them, ask us and ask them is their experience of confidence identical to my own experience of confidence or someone else's experience of confidence? So because the confidence is something that is very much unique to the individual and something that they are experiencing their own internal world, we might think that we have the same definition of confidence that they do, but that simply isn't the case. So an abstract experience is a quality that someone defines internally based on their own personal experiences, their personal feelings, hunches, instinct, intuition, etc. It's abstract. Another thing, I think a very easy way to illustrate what I mean by an abstract experience is hunger. When I say I'm hungry, am I describing the exact same physical sensation that you might be describing when you say you're hungry? No, hunger is experienced by everybody in perhaps different ways, subtle but different ways. And as a result, we might be labeling ourselves as being hungry far before someone else would consider themselves to be hungry. So the idea, it's abstract, it's not concrete. We can't test for it, measure it, prove it in our external world. We instead have to go into our internal experience of our world and talk about or share with other people what our definition is of this abstract concept. So point is, a great deal of the thoughts that are going on with someone when they start talking about challenge can be in this category of abstract experiences. And then the other thing that does fall into abstract variables is mysticism. Now, mysticism is just a collective term for the degree to which someone bestows beliefs upon powers that exist outside of themselves. And certainly if people have very strong religious beliefs, that could be part of it. Maybe people have very strong spiritual beliefs, and that could be part of it. Maybe people just kind of believe that there are things going on in the universe at large that are impacting everything around them. Maybe it's the positions of the planets, whatever it is. We cast absolutely no value judgment on any of those, but we do recognize recognize that they are very powerful influencers in the way that someone may frame and move forward on the pursuit of a particular goal or performance of a particular activity. So it's all going to fit in. It tends to impact someone's perceptions of challenge, and that's where it comes into play. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Obviously, we could talk about abstractions and mysticism for hours,
Yeah.
but
See,
in
I have a
general
couple
terms, yeah.
comments.
Yep.
One is, even though if we go back to ability for a second, that seems more objective because our clients are using their self-perception. I mean, isn't there a subjective element to that as well?
Well, there always is. In fact, Dave brings up a very important point, and that is there's a very big difference between perception and reality. And far, far, far more often than not, when we are working with our clients, we're really working with their perceptions of what's going on. Yeah, there are plenty of times that we could help them to identify something that truly exists in reality and help them to understand how that part of reality, again, this is in air quotes, is going to come into play, might impact them, etc. But we know this, and we know this for certain. Most of the time, well, most people are operating out of their perceptions of reality more so than reality itself. And so I think that as we talk about anything having to do with managing productive tension, certainly most of what we may be dealing with when it comes to human development pursuits, coaching, training, consulting, therapy, whatever the modality happens to be, we're dealing primarily with people's perceptions of reality. Then we can certainly help them to better identify, define, accept reality as it may actually be existing around them. And again, we'd have to be able to, for it to be reality, we have to be able to prove it in very concrete sorts of terms. But yeah, it's all about people's perception. So certainly when we're asking someone to rate their knowledge, their skill, the experience, I could prove something about those variables in the real world. I could give you a test to establish your level of knowledge, and
Hmm.
based on that test, I could say that's real, or I could test your skill, or I could really do a thorough background check and to understand your real scope of experience. So there is a much greater opportunity to have true concrete reality when it comes to rating ability. That being said, as Dave just said, people could perceive their level of knowledge, skill, and experience in a very different and distorted way. And sometimes that means we have to help them to assess that and perhaps redefine it and own it, whatever the truth really happens to be. Yeah, more on that, Dave?
Just another comment to that, and tell me if this analogy kind of works when we talk about ability and challenges. I've always to help people understand that difference, because again, with the air quotes, people sometimes there, and with all these dimensions in the change grid, I guess we'll see that there is overlap between them.
Oh, yeah.
I think of ability as someone's strength in terms of a metaphor. Like if I use you think of the gym and a weightlifter, and I think
True.
of challenge as the weight they're lifting. So
Ah, I like that. That's a very good way to illustrate it. Yeah, there's always, when we're asking someone to share with us some perspective they have going on in their head, we're doing something rather contrived when we say, tell me how you rate your ability, like your brain is capable of separating everything else that's going on in the internal environment and identify only the ability. I mean, that takes some real focused, decisive effort to do that. Likewise, I could say, set aside all your logic, just tell me how you feel about something. And again, this is a very contrived kind of thing that we're asking someone to do. The truth is that inside of their brain, all of these things are happening simultaneously. They're not living on the left or living in the right. They're bouncing all over. They're a full, complete human being using all their faculties simultaneously. So we're just asking them to do this as a little insight, because the insight helps us to help them pinpoint wherever their, as you said, their strengths are, and perhaps where their challenges lie, so that we can support them in preparing themselves to deal with whatever those challenges are most effectively to be able to reach their outcomes. Now, challenge also has a scale. Challenge ranges from a low of 0 to a high of 12. If we said the challenge was very, very low, then we'd be giving a number like 0, 1, or 2. If it's moderate, 5, 6, 7, 8. If it's high, 10, 11, 12. Again, conversationally, your client might say, oh, it feels really challenging to me, or I don't think it's going to be much of a challenge. So they're going to give you just kind of a simple answer to the question, how challenging do you think you're going to find completing this activity? You could conversationally say, well, just give me a rating. So on a scale of 0 to 12, how would you rate your ability to do that? And you could do it that way as well. But conversationally, this is what's going on. So they may not give you the numbers, but they're going to give you the scale. Just know this, the higher the number, the more challenging the activity becomes. If someone were to actually legitimately assign a 12 to a challenge, what they're saying is that it is in fact impossible. And by impossible, we don't mean really, 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 really difficult. We mean impossible. So just like at the other end of the scale, by giving it a 0, 0 means effortless. Effortless doesn't mean super easy. Effortless means effortless. So very often we're going to hear clients give us these extreme ratings, 0 or 12, just kind of know that the reality of their situation, the truth be told, it's going to be somewhere in between. So encourage them to share with you in conversation how they rate their level of challenge, or if you really are using this as that paper and pencil tool, or you're using the online system, we're going to ask them to give a very specific rating for that. Again, we're talking about using this during coaching conversations. The most important thing is the conversation that's going on, not someone filling out an assessment form on paper and pencil or doing the one online. That's just if you want to take it to its highest level. All right, now the third assessment we can go into is the assessment of importance. Now, as you work your way through developing command of the change, grade, and fluency, you'll actually find out there's another factor as well, another dimension. But sometimes I think it's really useful to ask someone exactly how important is this goal to you? Like we said last time around, when someone is filling out that 4 aspects of control, it's interesting how often they end up realizing that whatever the situation is that they were exploring or the goal they were considering, it suddenly loses its attraction. And maybe we can go deeper into that by adding this question of importance to our discussion. So how do you rate your ability? How challenging is it? And really, how important is this activity to you in the big picture? Now, when we're asking someone to define importance, it tends to be a mixed brain, mixed focus sort of a thing, but it really tends to factor in deadlines, expectations, and preferences. We often find out that when we ask someone to tell us about the importance of something, we hear things ranging from, well, it's my life's purpose. It's super important to me. It's what I live for. It's everything to me. And then we also hear things like, well, that would be really important to my family. So that's why it's important to me. So it's kind of, if we looked at them in a vacuum, it might lose a little bit of importance, but in light of the social dynamic, it becomes very important. Or if this is something that's career related, the importance may be only related to climbing whatever the ladder happens to be. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it at all. So, and there's lots of things like that. For example, going and getting additional education, the person might say to you, if I didn't want to go up the ranks in the organization, I would not spend the money, the time, or the agony of going and getting an advanced degree. But I got to do it. If I want to be in the game, if I want to be able to have the opportunities, I got to go do this. So as you ask someone to define importance, it's interesting the kind of dialogue that can come out of that as well. Just like the other 2 dimensions, the importance scale also ranges from a low of 0 to a high of 12. 0 would be it's insignificant. It doesn't matter. It's trivial. I don't even care at all. Where 12 is, it's absolutely crucial. Life and death sort of situation. So these are the range for importance. Now, again, we want you to factor these things in at this point in your training just as something to add to conversation to get more depth of understanding and help your client to get a broader understanding of what's going on with their situation and their level of readiness to deal with whatever that situation happens to be. Now, For the rest of today's lesson, I want to talk about the change grid. Now, I need you, before I even start showing you this, to be able to separate in your mind the change grid as a simple diagram that explains a certain phenomenon from a tool that you can actually use to assess someone. So the change grid diagram is something that I want you to become very comfortable looking at, understanding, sharing with your clients conversationally or literally give them the diagram. Later on, as you really start to use the ChangeWorks system, you'll be able to say, not only is it a diagram, it's also a tool. And then you'll see how it's used in another way. So the change grid. Now, the diagram that you see on the screen in front of you right now is the change grid. And yes, for 35 plus years, we've had plenty of people tell us that it looks like a test pattern for a vintage color TV set back in the day. And when someone tells us that, they've kind of dated themselves. But yeah, we get it. The diagram has got a lot of colored lines going a lot of different directions. And at first glance, it seems like a whole lot of what? But as we work our way through this, you're going to find out a great deal about what each of those colors represents, what each one of those shapes and sections on the change grid all represents. In fact, if you'd like to know a little bit about where this comes from, there is a white paper that we've written and you'll find in the Student Resource Center called The Merging of Brilliance. The change grid is actually the result of combining several hundred different models of human behavior into a single model. Some of these models are thousands of years old, just ancient. Others are quite contemporary, but many models have been identified over all the years that we've been doing this. And rather than debate which model is good, bad, right, wrong, better, worse, whatever, we just say, you know what? They're all trying to describe the same thing. And that is, how does a human actually operate? So we thought, rather than discussing and debating and putting some sort of value judgment on an individual tool, we said, why don't we just view all the tools as being glimpses of brilliance? Let's blend all that brilliance together and let's see what the result would look like. So we went through a very long process, and it continues to this day, where we merge the brilliance that we've identified in countless people, countless sources over, thousands of years of documented human pursuit of understanding. And so that's what you're looking at. So while it may seem very complex visually, it's simply a way to allow people who already know and understand certain models of human behavior. Maybe that's a personality typing system that you understood, or it's a way about performance management. All these models of human behavior, again, should be able to be integrated because they're all looking at the same thing, humans. How do humans operate? How do they pursue something? How do they position themselves? So we wanted to blend it all together into a single unified tool for more easily, more powerfully understanding this fascinating creature called a human. So here it is. So that's what it looks like. Now, again, we're going to take this nice and simply, and we're going to start off with the response states. These are the levels of productive tension. So going back to the training for lesson 1, we said to you that ultimately the critical ingredient that determines what someone is going to do and when they're going to do it is all about the level of tension they happen to be experiencing. And we did make simple reference to too much tension ends up destroying productivity, and too little tension doesn't give us enough energy to have any real productivity. And we talked about how as the level of tension goes up, productivity goes up as well. So, and I shared with you what the power was of the levels of tension in dictating what someone was going to do. So I showed you that matrix and said, if someone's considering a change, there are 3 variables: logic, feasibility, and tension. And I showed you the power of tension in deciding what's going to happen. So What I want you to do now is to understand that tension comes in levels. And this simple layer of the change grid shows you the 5 levels of productive tension that we use as kind of stopping points along a continuum to really understand what's going on with somebody when their levels of tension are, where they happen to be. Now, the level of tension is actually arises from the 2 perceptions people have about their ability to do something and the challenge associated with doing it. So if they perceive their ability as high and the challenge as being very low, that's going to put them someplace on the change grid. And if ability is moderate and challenge is high, that's going to put them someplace else. So based on their ratings, we can figure out where they are on the change grid. Now, again, you do not need to do this as the tool, as the assessment. But in your head, if someone says to you, well, my ability to do that activity is really pretty strong, and I don't think it's going to be very difficult at all, I need you as trained, certified ChangeWorks system coaches to know, where does that put them on this diagram and what does that mean? Or do they say, well, my ability isn't very high at all, but good grief, how challenging could it possibly be? I want you to be able to, in your mind's eye, look at this diagram and go like, yep, I know where they're at, because where they fall in the change grid is going to help you to ask more powerful questions and provide them with insights and guidance that will help them as they pursue whatever it is they're trying to pursue. So now we talked earlier about the axes. So perceived ability is here on the bottom, perceived challenge is up here on the top. It's slanted for a reason we'll get into later in your training. Perceived importance would be the 3rd dimension that would turn this into a cube. And there is some advanced understanding about ChangeWorks we all want you guys to have. That's why, as someone who graduates from our program, we give you access to a lot of enrichment webinars. These are things that are just included in your tuition that look at different aspects of the change grid and productive tension management and how it applies to your work or what's going on at each layer in more detail, what happens if the change grid becomes a cube. None of those things are necessary for you to become a very effective, perhaps even an expert ChangeWorks system coach. So they're just there for enrichment. Nevertheless, you may find them very interesting to look at and learn from. Okay, now, so the levels of tension are also referred to as response states, because the level of tension is not something that is essential to the person's being. It's connected to the activity and the moment in time that we're looking at this. And so there are 3 primary response states we're going to be looking at. Those are stress, way at the top, power in the middle, and apathy at the bottom. And there's also 2 hybrid response states, power stress, which happens midway between power and stress, surprise of all surprises. And there's also power apathy, which is midway between power and apathy. So that gives us these 5 response states we tend to look at. So stress from the top, stress, power, power apathy, and at the bottom, apathy. There's also 2 paradoxical response states that we'll talk about later on in your program. These are also things that are covered in detail in the enrichment programs, but they're just what happens when something just doesn't seem to be what their client is telling us it really is. We might be in a situation where the person is actually experiencing the opposite of what they seem to be experiencing. Those are paradoxical response states. We'll get to those later. For now, let's just keep it nice and simple. These are the response states. So we're going to go through each level of tension and talk about some of the interesting things that happen at a particular level of tension. Now, one of the handouts that you have for today's lesson is Form D1, that's what it's called. It is a quick reference guide, and I want you to know that everything I'm about to say, everything I'm about to say is going to be on that reference guide. So rather than feel the need to take feverish notes, just know that they've already been mapped out for you, and that reference guide has got the key elements on there about it, all the things I'm about to talk about. So let's start with the highest level of tension. That's the stress response state. Now, the stress response state occurs whenever you are in a situation where you perceive the level of challenge that that situation represents as being far greater than your ability to handle that challenge. Now, you are no doubt have had countless opportunities to witness someone who is up in stress or experience it yourself. And if you think about those particular situations, whatever it was that triggered this stress response state, what was going on was you were in a situation either in the moment or thinking about a situation that might be headed your way. And as you thought about that situation, you perceived the level of challenge as being far greater than your level of ability, your level of readiness to take care of that challenge at this moment in time. Now, I want to bring to all of your attention that you did not need to be asked those two questions. You did not need to fill out a chart in order to have a stress response. Your brain, your mind, your internal environment is constantly evaluating the world around you and constantly evaluating your level of readiness to meet whatever it is that's before you. So without ever giving any conscious thought to it, your brain is already processing the level of challenge and the level of ability and the level of importance associated with whatever that activity or that situation at hand happens to trigger for you. All we're doing in our role as coaches is asking someone to stop for a moment and do something that's very conscious and very deliberate and think about their level of ability, think about the level of challenge to do and share that with us. Now, that's going to become very important, particularly when you recognize that at all times, your client is displaying a certain level of tension. So if you're just starting off a conversation with them or you're just saying hello to them face to face, you may immediately detect that there is some stress response going on. And that alone tells you that there is something that you may want to pursue with the client about what's happening in this moment. Tell me about the situation. Tell me how you rate your ability to handle that situation. How challenging does this feel and why? And so there's a lot of good quality questions you could be asking in your role as, we'll just say, as a tension professional, a tension management professional that will help you to say, I've picked up on a signal. Now I need the detail to be able to do the most effective job that I can. So recognize that all the things as we're working through are opportunities for you to engage the client in more meaningful dialogue. Dave, any questions, comments about that?
Not at all.
Okay, good. So now let me tell you, there's some things that come along with someone being up in stress. And again, these are all on your reference guide. So there's a key phrase. What does stress sound like? Stress sounds like this. I know I need to do something, but I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Please help me. I'm out of control, going back to what you learned last time around. I'm not feeling safe, secure, happy, and healthy. I don't know what to do. So this person is clearly acknowledging to you that they question their ability to handle it. They're acknowledging that they do not have what is necessary to meet that challenge. I know I need to do something. That's that stress talking about how powerful this challenge happens to be. But I don't know what to do, so I'm coming to you. Give me some guidance. Give me some resource. Help me to do whatever's need to be. So that's what's going on in their head, maybe even how they're expressing what's going on verbally. The key word, if we needed to define it with one word, is panic. Stress is a panic state. And if we were to look at the individual's physiology, we would see the stress response manifesting itself in pulse rate and blood pressure and skin temperature and everything else that's going on inside of our physiology. So we would be in this panic sort of a situation. Now, that said, notice that stress is not a tiny little point. Stress is kind of a big wedge. And so stress can also express itself to varying levels. But once the person is up in stress, and again, to get there, perceived level of challenge has to greatly exceed ability, we're going to start seeing some things hold true, some patterns emerge. Now, some of those patterns are in the person's emotional state. Now, the emotions that someone tends to experience up in stress tend to be of the unresourceful variety. You know, there are countless emotions we could talk about, but we could also move those emotions into two categories. Those are resourceful and unresourceful. Now, I'm not casting a value judgment on the emotion. The emotions are all good. They are all part of our human experience for a given reason. But when we look at a particular emotion, and we're experiencing that emotion, we can say, is that emotion supporting our ability to better understand our situation, to do whatever it is that needs to be done, put forth a plan, in which case we'd say that emotion is supporting more of our resourceful sort of forward movement? Or does that emotion tend to distort reality, tend to feed upon itself? Tends to pull us out of reality and more into the world of our mind, in which case we might say that that emotion, as valuable as it may be under given circumstances, at this point in time isn't really helping us move forward in the most productive, desirable, purposeful sort of way. Hopefully all of you, as experienced coaches and human development professionals, can make that distinction. So the emotions are all good. That's fine. I just want to ask myself, if I leave this person in this emotional state, or if the client continues to experience this emotional state, what is the chances of them coming up with and following through with the best strategy? If the answer is that's just not where those kinds of good decisions are being made, then we want to just be able to very simply define those as being more on the unresourceful side of things than the resourceful side of things. Now, happy to talk about that, whatever detail anyone might like. But the emotions we tend to encounter up in stress are anger, grief, fear, and shame. So when you're in the stress response, it is not at all surprising that someone might be displaying some anger or some fear or regret about what's going on, or some sort of embarrassment about whatever that's going on. Now, those emotions are useful to us. And so interestingly enough, anger is very tightly connected to pain. Now, that pain could be physical, that pain could be emotional, that pain could be intellectual. But it is very predictable that if someone feels as though they have been physically, intellectually, or emotionally injured, that they're going to respond with anger. So let me quickly demonstrate this for you. If you touch a hot stove, if you stub your toe, you do have an emotional reaction, and normally it's a quick anger response. So you can imagine the words that you say when you touch the hot stove and go like, yeah, that is just kind of a little moment of anger. I'm angry with the stove, or I'm angry with the door that I stubbed my toe into. Not me for touching the hot stove, or me for stubbing my toe. No, I'm angry with whatever it is that has caused me this pain. Similarly, and perhaps more routinely, if we feel as though we have been intellectually injured. An intellectual injury is when someone questions our intelligence or insults us in some sort of way, they basically wonder or even say things that make us feel as though we are not prepared for something. So an attack on our intelligence tends to be followed by an anger response. And the third possibility is also true. We talked about that tension is about physical, intellectual, and emotional energy. Maybe somebody hurt my feelings. Um, or maybe I, have suffered some sort of a loss, and for a moment I'm angry about that. But it's about this other person that kind of triggered that in me. So, or maybe I triggered it in myself. So these are the emotions we tend to find: anger, grief, fear, and shame. Anger, again, is about pain. Grief is about the loss of a loved one, is usually how we define it. But it can also be the loss of an object, the loss of an opportunity, the loss of a connection, connection that we might have had with another person or a group of people. So not at all surprising if someone leaves their current employment, goes to a new place of employment. There might be some grief because they've lost those relationships or they've lost the familiarity. There could be some grief there. Fear is about anticipation, that something even worse is going to happen. So bad, even worse, whatever, but it's always compared to the moment in time. So something is happening right now and I fear for an even worse situation, or I imagine down the road I'm going to encounter something. And shame is an interesting word because it has a full range of expression. It could be a simple bit of embarrassment, like if we commit some sort of a social faux pas. Shame could just be that moment of embarrassment that makes us look at our behavior in the moment, maybe even very quietly and personally, and say, oops, I crossed a line there. Ooh, I don't want to do that again. So, and at the other hand, it could be a very deep wound about failing to do whatever it is it happens to be and feeling fully responsible and accountable for whatever that may be. So there's a full range. So the level of tension carries with it a certain set of emotions. I don't need to ask someone to rate their level of ability and challenge for them to end up in stress and display these emotions. I might just encounter the emotion. But I want to know that if I encounter anger, grief, fear, or shame, I'm upgrid. I'm up there in stress, and I might want to pursue that situation with more questions. Reasoning abilities are also impacted by your level of productive tension. Reasoning abilities are about how you go about figuring something out. And generally speaking, there are two ways that you can figure something out. You can, and that's in air quotes again, you can figure something out by looking at all the facts and figures, all of the concrete logical data you could collect, and then drawing some sort of realistic, meaningful conclusion from all that, in which case we would say your reasoning abilities were more logically ruled. But reasoning abilities can also very frequently be emotionally ruled. These are about hunches, instinct, intuition, kind of telling us in the moment, do this, do this, do this. And we may get to that decision without ever looking at any of the true facts and figures. So those facts and figures may very well have been around and available to us, but because we're very far upgrade, we're up in stress, we end up setting aside that logic and we end up being ruled more by whatever those emotional aspects of it happen to be. So reasoning abilities up in stress tend to be more emotionally ruled, dictated by hunches, instinct, intuitions, gut level sorts of things that are going on. The level of tension also affects someone's decision-making abilities. When someone is up in stress, they most definitely make decisions, but those decisions tend to be, again, more ruled by those hunches, instinct, and intuition, and those emotions they're experiencing. And as a result, the decisions tend to be very reactive. Maybe the decision is reactive because the person is truly in a life or death situation. They don't have time to look at the logic. They have to go with whatever that instinct is driving them to do. But nevertheless, this is part of a reaction. That's not necessarily bad. It just is what it is. This is a reactive decision that's being made. Now, we know that it's reactive after the fact. If the truth is, after the tension comes down, the situation passes, the person may very well reevaluate what they did. And when they reevaluate what they did, they may have chosen to do something very different. So what's happening then? Maybe what's really happening is that they're no longer in stress. So they are no longer in that unresourceful emotional state. They're no longer being ruled by emotional reasoning. So that's it. But as long as they're up in stress, these things are going to hold true. Dave, any questions, comments about that?
Nope.
Okay, so now the third little set of things to tell you about stress is that when someone's up in stress, their perceived availability of resources is also very impacted. And those resources begin to be perceived as being severely limited to non-existent. So again, the person who's up in stress feels totally out of control. They don't feel like they've got the resources necessary to do whatever's need to be done. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skill, they don't have the experience. They may not have the true core physical resources necessary. Don't have the money, don't have the time, don't have the staff, don't have the whatever. So resource availability, severely limited to virtually non-existent. Their idea of control up here, they're going to feel very much out of control. And productivity tends to be very poor. Stress is characterized by many false starts with very few results. Now, as I said during lesson one, you may very well have a client come to you who has already tried, struggled with, and perhaps failed to get to whatever their desired outcome happens to be, which has led them to seek out your support and guidance. Who knows how many false starts they've gone through? Who knows how many resources what little they might have had, have already been burned through, have already been squandered. So this is the problem with someone who is not only up in stress, but has been up in stress for a period of time. Many false starts, no real results yet, certainly they're not where they need to be. Part of the challenge with stress is that when someone is up in stress, they are generally pursuing a course of action. Again, that reactive decision making triggered them to take some sort of an action. But as they pursue that course of action, they may very well discover that another course of action exists. And when they are in that situation, they have a tendency to abandon the course they were on. Whether it is good or bad, right or wrong is not even explored. They simply reactively abandon the course they were on and start to pursue another course of action. And again, we haven't established if it's good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just the stress response triggering people to constantly jump onto another course of action that they hope will help them get to where they want to be. Imagine what that's happening to them physically, emotionally, intellectually, and in terms of the actual resources they have available to them. What's happening? So obviously the situation is building on itself, getting worse and worse and worse. And we talked about it being unresourceful emotion, distorting the problem, etc. So obviously, stress is not a good place for someone to be. We do have a stress response because it could save our life someday. That's where fight or flight and the other two, freeze and fade, are also going to exist, but not a place we want to live, and certainly not a place where we want to have a person when they are making decisions about how they move forward. Just a couple more slides. Physical cues. We know they're up in stress because they are giving us physical cues that tell us that as well. So their body's postures, their gestures, their facial expressions, their breathing rate, their attire, all of these things are also communicating what's going on with someone's level of tension. So in the case of being up in stress, the postures tend to become very rigid and guarded. Gestures become large and wild. Facial expressions tend to be very animated. Their breathing rate is very fast, as is a lot of their other life signs. And their attire is whatever it is, but if they've been in the stress response for a while, they start to become rather sloppy, and you can look at them. They're just not put together. When it comes to tonal cues, which are volume, tempo, pitch, affect, and inflection, the volume tends to be very loud, tempo very fast, the pitch of their voice quite high. The affect, that's the amount of accent in their voice, tends to be quite strong, particularly if you're dealing with someone from another country that doesn't speak English as their first language. You might start hearing a lot of that their natural accent come through. This is going to become more and more prevalent as the level of tension goes up. Inflection is about the range of change in someone's verbal cue or tonal cues. They become more dynamic when someone's up in stress. So up and down, all over the place. There are also some verbal cues. This is about the actual words that they're choosing. And those contain things like grammar, vocabulary, the usage of jargon and slang, filler material, which is what we give someone to listen to while we're getting our next thought together. So the ums and ahs that people tend to put forth. And then predicates are words that indicate a certain sensory system is being favored at that time. So up in stress, grammar is thrown out the window. Sentence structure actually vanishes and one sentence just blends into the next. Vocabulary becomes smaller. As tension goes up, people tend to have a simpler set of words that they use from. Their use of jargon and slang increases quite dramatically. Filler material, the ums and ahs, become more prevalent because people are trying to gather their thoughts, need to take a breath, so they give you something to listen to while that's happening. And then predicates tend to be more visual. We'll also talk about auditory predicates and kinesthetic predicates as well, but words that indicate the visual sense is going on. So up in stress, they're likely to say, things are looking pretty bad. So can you see it from my perspective? All I see is struggle ahead of me. Yeah. So some sort of word that indicates that their visual sense is what's being tapped into as they are up in stress. Okay, and then the last thing I want to say about stress is, and then we'll break here and we will continue this on our on part B of today's lesson, is what's the upside and downside? Before anyone starts to say stress is a terrible thing, let me tell you that stress has a very powerful upside, and that is that it puts us into survival mode. It triggers all of our survival instincts. It helps us to focus to the abandonment of all other things on whatever it is that's threatening us in that particular moment. Stress response is nature's way of saying to you, something is going on, pay attention. Now, the downside is that stress ends up being something that is very debilitating if we tend to live there. So yes, it's very important that we experience the stress if we are in a truly justifiable situation. We really are struggling. We really are in a life or death situation. But if that's not what's going on, this is not the place to live. And unfortunately, the way that life is lived and things are happening in daily life, we end up in stress a lot more often than not. So now, so what we want to be able to do is to consciously do things to lower our level of productive tension, to get ourselves out of stress to a more productive place. So with that, Dave, any questions, comments we need to cover before we're done for today?
Just that, these levels of tension that you're going through, and we just went through the first one, really become a nice lens for the coach in working with clients. And it also becomes a nice vocabulary as you teach it to your clients. So
absolutely, absolutely. And we do say this, that becoming someone who's very skilled in this management of productive tension is not something that you kind of do as a technique you are choosing to apply in a given situation. It ends up becoming just part of the fabric of the way that you end up interacting with people and living life and working in your role as a professional or every other aspect of your being. So this idea about tension is always present. You're always experiencing a certain level of tension. Everyone around you is always experiencing a certain level of tension, and that level of tension is always being managed, ideally by someone who is doing it consciously and deliberately, but very often our tension is being managed, I'm going to say manipulated, by things that are going on in the environment around us, in the world at large, in terms of media exposure, etc. And this is where things end up becoming very problematic. So we'll continue to explore that as training continues. So this ends part A. We'll continue next time. Thanks, everybody.